Hello folks and welcome to today's episode of the Well Teacher Festival. I'm really pleased to introduce the seriously inspiring Haili Hughes for this episode. Haili is the author of it is a brilliant book called Preserving Positivity, which was published by John Catt in July. And I was really lucky to get a sneaky early copy of it earlier in the summer, and it really kind of nourished and inspired and I guess motivated me through some, as we were all experiencing some difficult and challenging times being a teacher. So that book explores some of the reasons why teachers leave the profession and explores what we can do, particularly looking at experienced teachers, what experienced teachers can do to sustain their passion, their fuel, their fire for working in the classroom. And let's be honest, ultimately, that positivity is what we all do want to hold on to. And it's that positivity that we feel going into the start of a new year. We feel kind of fired up and ready for the challenge. But obviously, as Haili points out quite early in her presentation, you know, that it's been a fraught few years, for teachers. And that public perception of teachers and the kind of their barcode regarding results has obviously had an impact on how energised we feel about coming back. And then alongside that, there's that anxiety about this kind of new world that we enter. But anyway, trust me, when you watch this presentation, you will feel reassured, you will feel ready, you will feel very much engaged in getting back into the school environment. Because Haili takes us through, she walks us through how we can remain positive and optimistic about the teaching year ahead. And it's packed full of practical tips, and including how we can start to solve that mystery about kind of work-life and family balance. And really helpfully towards the end of the presentation, Haili walks us through some fantastic tips in terms of how we can manage behaviour and ensure that relationships in our classrooms are kept as positive and as wholesome as possible. So I hope you really enjoy it, and I hope you feel, like I did at the end of it, positive and hugely energised. And a massive thank you to Haili for recording it for the festival. Okay, thanks folks.
Hello, I'm Haili Hughes, and I'm the author of a book called Preserving Positivity, published by John Catt. Now, positivity isn't something that comes easily to me. I am a kind of glass half empty person, which was why I wrote the book. And, I'm not telling everybody that they should be endlessly positive in education, because there's lots in education to get angry about, especially at the moment. But it's about creating that kind of resilience in the profession that we need to have any longevity in it. And that's really what my book's about. So I wanted to speak to you today about things to remember when returning to school and to try to stay positive throughout this really long, dark term that we have ahead of us. So you can see that I've chosen quite a snazzy background here, and I've done that on purpose because you can see this in really one of two ways. You can either see it as like, your kind of emotions and your resilience and your fight exploding during this term as you start to get more annoyed and more angry and more frustrated at some of the things that you see happening. But you can also see it as kind of the beauty of a firework going off, because I sometimes think that in teaching we forget the beauty of what we are actually doing and how much of an impact we have on the students that we teach. So that's what I want to chat to you about today. So I've used a kind of provocative quote there by the writer Terry Pratchett. It's from one of his books, Mort. And it says, "It would seem that you have no useful skill or talent whatsoever," he said. "Have you thought of going into teaching?" And like many of you, I've had a very bizarre summer. It probably hasn't been the restful summer that we might have needed or have expected. And there's been quite a lot in the media, hasn't there, about teachers. And I would say, bashing the profession, really, in many ways. So on the right-hand side there, I've got lots of little snippets of articles from the Daily Mail about teachers. We've got lots of things about, teachers betraying children by closing schools, that the unions trying to sabotage the reopening of schools, lots of really loaded language about teachers' moral duty, and us parents demanding that digital schooling needs to be better, and that teachers weren't up to scratch essentially. So like many of you, I'm going into the new school term now already quite exhausted by some of the things that I've had to put up with this summer, some of the things I've read in papers, seen on TV, read on Twitter. I mean, I think it started out, didn't it, when we went into lockdown, that people were really starting to appreciate teachers, and I saw a real turn really in the representation of the profession, with many parents saying, wow, teachers are amazing, I don't know how you do what you do, as they have to come to terms and get to grips with the reality of actually teaching their own children. So it's been an interesting summer, to say the least, and that's why I think this chat hopefully is very important to kind of set us off on the right foot when we've already been through so many traumatic things. And this week as well, we also have the GCSE results to contend with as well. So my book, Preserving Positivity, is really aimed at experienced classroom practitioners. So by that I mean teachers who've been teaching for 5, 6 years and above. And I did that really purposefully, to be honest. It's something that I was quite keen on doing, is targeting those teachers. And the reason why is because I think there is a glut and a plethora really of support resources out there for early career teachers, and I just didn't think there was anything for experienced teachers, of which I am one. Without moving through the kind of structures of school and becoming a senior leader, I feel like sometimes us classroom teachers are at the coalface every day. We feel a little bit abandoned, and actually we're about to move into a brave new world of education. And I think the longer that you've been in the teaching profession, in my experience anyway, if you're reasonably happy with your job, the less kind of butterflies we're getting at the start of the school year in September, because we've done many, many years and we know roughly, what we are going to be expecting. But this year is going to be really hard for experienced teachers, and to some extent it's going to be a little bit like being an NQT again, because we are going into this brave new world of social distancing. Education probably will not be what we've seen really in the last 30, 40 years. So I think it's also important to remain positive in the face of bizarre changes that we may not be really au fait with. So I am quite, unfortunately, a natural negative person, as I mentioned before, and I do think that negativity, especially with teachers, really can be a natural state of mind that we can fall into. And some of the research I did for my book really corroborated this. So there's an academic called Dr. Richard Boyatzis, and he says that we are actually naturally predisposed to be negative, not just teachers, kind of humans in general. And he calls it a negative emotional attractor approach. And that essentially means that we overemphasize the problems that we have over our vision, and it's all to do with activating this sympathetic flight or fight nervous system that we have, and the regions of the brain that are associated with blaming ourselves and experiencing negative moods sometimes come out a bit more when we are under these stressful situations. And I mean, from my own experience, I've certainly found that, when I've got heaps of mocks to mark, when the nights are dark and I'm supposed to be doing this and doing that, and I've got parents' evenings coming up, and then, when I'm in this stressful situation, I do tend to think more negatively. And the book is actually based around some of these negative thoughts. So each chapter is named after one of the reasons to leave the profession, and I've put them on the slide for you there. So there are 10 chapters, and all of these reasons to leave the profession were taken from some research that the DFE did on why teachers were leaving the profession. So each of the chapters takes one of these kind of negative thought patterns, and it looks at the research, but then it also looks at real world case studies and speaks to lots of teachers, senior leaders who've been in the profession for years, and also looks at my own experience and how we've actually overcome that and practical tips. So I thought for this talk today that I would pick three of those chapters that I think will be most pertinent really to the term that we've got ahead. And I will talk about some of the research behind it first of all, but also some of the practical tips that I got from some of the people that I spoke to and from my own experience. And hopefully it will help you too. So the first thing to remember is something that I think is really important and that most teachers struggle with at some point in their life, which is the work-life, family and balance. And I think that cartoon sums it up really. It's important to live a balanced life, 8 hours of sleeping, 8 hours for working and 8 hours for working harder. And we all feel a little bit like this come Christmas time, don't we? I mean, like me, I'm sure that you will be subject to, or you have been subject to some of the jokes that people make about teaching hours. And to be honest, that was my perspective on teaching. I was a late entrant to the profession after doing a very, very stressful job as a journalist in Fleet Street in London. I really did think that teachers worked from sort of 8 o'clock till 4 and you had all these paid holidays. And of course, those of us in the profession or anybody that knows a teacher knows that that is actually a kind of wicked joke, really, when it comes to the reality of teaching. And Mary Boosted told the Guardian newspaper in 2018 that she thinks there's this toxic mix of factors, really, that's been created by the government that's making teachers decide that they just can't teach anymore, they can't do it. And there's this systematic overworking. And she was talking about how many teachers work kind of 55 hours plus a week. And I've certainly done that, easily 60 hours a week at some points in my career. And she also talked about this vicious accountability system that means that teachers we're not given the time and the support that we actually need to get better at what we do. And really, it needs to stop. And it's happened, unfortunately, because teachers have put up with it over the years, and we have continued to just meet more and more outlandish, ridiculous, and difficult demands. And we just keep going until we've got nothing left to give. And I think this year, one of the things that you need to remember is that you need to think about just saying no, and that can be really, really difficult. So here are my tips for this year in this category, the work, life and family balance. As I mentioned, I think it's important to just say no, as hard as that may be. Teachers have continued to go above and beyond so much that it's now actually just an expectation that it's what we'll do and we'll just like it and we'll just lump it. And one of the fantastic English teachers that I follow on Twitter, and I'm sure many of you do, is called Heidi Drake. And I interviewed her for my book, and she said something that really resonated with me that I want to pass on to other people. And that is that no is a complete sentence. And I loved that, because the amount of times that I've got up the courage to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And then I felt like I have to make excuses for the reason why I can't do it. And actually, no, that's enough. That is a complete sentence. So it's about having that courage to know what your boundaries are, what your limits are, and stick to it. So another important thing in work, life, family and balance to remember this year is about using other kinds of feedback as opposed to just traditional writing and written marking. Because I really think, especially as an English teacher, the marking can just make you drown. And I use the analogy of an octopus, I think, in the book, with it getting its slippery tentacles onto you and pulling you under. And I think you could literally sit and mark all evening, every single weekend, but that's no good for anybody's well-being. And it's definitely not good for work, life, family and balance, that's for sure. So look at other ways of using feedback, such as verbal feedback, class marking sheets, class marking codes, peer and self-assessment, whole class feedback sheets. There's a plethora of different strategies that you can use for marking that will really save you time and help you to claw back that work-life balance. And I do speak about some of those in the book as well, and I do give kind of examples of those that you can use. So hopefully that's quite useful. Another thing is to list and prioritise. Now, I am super OCD and organised when it comes to things, and I love a list. But, lists just for the sake of it that are 10 miles long actually make you feel even worse and more anxious. So it's about prioritising. So I think you've got to ask yourself, Who am I doing this for? If the answer is actually that it's a box ticking exercise and there's going to be no impact, then just don't do it. I mean, there's been so many occasions in my career when I've been asked to do things that are really long, laborious tasks, and I've given them in and I've never heard back about it since. And I'm not really sure what that fed into or what impact that had. And I've spoken to other colleagues who actually didn't do it and weren't spoken to, were reprimanded, and I felt a bit annoyed about that I'd given up my evenings and weekends to do it, and actually it was just a flash in the pan that didn't really get used. So, think really carefully about what impact what you are doing is having, and if the answer is none and it's a box ticking exercise, well, I wouldn't bother to do it. So prioritize, think really carefully about what you are spending your time on. I think another really important thing is to ask for help and collaborate with others. So essentially, if you are struggling, you need to tell your management that you are struggling. Most of them will have had families themselves, and hopefully if they are any kind of decent leader, they will step in and help you prioritize what you need to do and relieve some of that burden. I think collaboration is just key to work-life, family and balance. And it's just so healthy as well as a teacher to work with others. Twitter and other resources are fantastic for helping with this and with collaboration. And I really see the internet, if used correctly, as one giant staff room where everybody can help one another and collaborate on things to try and push workload down. Why reinvent the wheel if it's been done before? I think workload is a huge problem. But I think some of its potency in actually grinding down staff comes from the mind. And that's from this dreaded guise of teacher guilt. And I think it just needs to be banished. Teacher guilt, we've all experienced it. It happens when you feel like there's always more you want to be doing, or you could be doing more for your students if only you had time to actually get it done. But you don't, and you never will. And you'll send yourself crazy with thoughts that you may be a bad teacher because you haven't managed to do X, Y, and Z, or even worse, you start comparing yourself to these other inspirational teachers who seem like they've got it all sorted. But chances are that they're probably all struggling as much as you are, and they also have thoughts like this as well, but that might not come across. So try to banish that teacher guilt as much as you can. We're all here just doing the best that we can for the kids. And I think my final one in work-life, family and balance is about this toxic cult of perfectionism that we keep seeing and trying to ignore it. So, we all know these, or we think we know these Instagram and Twitter perfect professionals and families. And really, if you dig under the surface, they just don't exist. People might look like swans, but what we don't see is that underneath the water, the little legs are going like crazy trying to stay afloat. And I think it's important to remember that, we are all losing our stuff a lot of the time, and teaching is a roller coaster. Work-life balance cannot exist all the time, and the sooner that you accept that, the better. There are going to be times when you have to spend more time at work and your personal life kind of suffers a little bit because of that. But there are going to be times when your personal life takes precedence. And I think it's about taking the rough with the smooth and realizing that it is this roller coaster. It's important to do something for you. So that might be mindfulness. I talk a lot about that in the book, and there are some resources that you can use. I mean, I particularly love yoga, and I love fashion and going out and shopping. So whatever floats your boat, whatever gives you some you time, make sure that you do it, because at the end of the day, we are all working to live, not living to work. And that's really important if you want to stay positive for this next term. So here is a bit of an example of me trying to balance work life and family. That's me with my 2-year-old scoffing a breadstick there, regretting the decision to do a PhD. So there will be times that, this work-life balance works. There will be times when you just have to suck it up. And there is another day with my 2 in the beautiful Saddleworth countryside where I live. So, I think I'm a living embodiment really of the tips that I'm giving you here, to just realise that actually work-life balance isn't going to exist all the time. There are going to be times when you have to give up a little bit of your time to get work done, but there are going to be other times where you just need to switch off completely and spend the time with your family. So the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is results pressure and the fallout. The reason why I've written this picture is because every single year when I go on holiday, I've always got in the back of my mind that last Thursday in August and results, and thinking about what's actually going to happen. So I've put that down there because this is a perfect exemplification, really, of this metaphorical rain cloud that's hanging over you, and of worry, really, and the accountability for results, and that teacher guilt we talked about, whether our children that we've taught have done well or not, and it does kind of hang over you, doesn't it, like some bad weather when you're having your holiday. And I think after this summer, even more pressure's been put on teachers, because obviously we came up with the centre assessed grade, and all the debacle that's happened this week over the A-level results, and a couple of weeks ago in Scotland. I think teachers are now feeling the strain and the pressure more than ever. And I think I've got 2 year 11s when we get back in September, of varying different abilities. And I think for me, certainly, I'm feeling the pressure for the new year 11 as well. And we haven't even started back yet, particularly after them missing so much learning. So as well as dealing with the recent GCSE farce and fallout, you may also be going into this new term really feeling quite negative about the worry for the GCSE in 2021 as well. So in the book, I cited a source from The Guardian, the Secret Teacher column from 2018, and they were spoken about this feeling that fingers would be pointing at them if the results were not as expected. And they said that many students and parents believe that it's a teacher's job to get a child good grades, whether or not they make an effort. If they do badly or misbehave, that is your fault for making the lessons boring. And I know that as an ex-head of department in a special measures school, I certainly felt that pressure, and I still feel it as a classroom teacher. And it can sometimes feel like living under this magnifying glass of scrutiny and accountability. And Andrew Cartwright, who is a head of English that I interviewed for the book, said that progress 8 and statistical outcomes are simply another stick to beat us all with. And I know a lot of colleagues do feel like that a little bit about results. So we may be going into this half term thinking quite negatively about that, which is why I chose this as a topic. So for your things to remember, I've picked these 3 things. So certainly, the current system of education all the way from primary school to university is so entrenched in this high stakes assessment of exams that it may actually seem impossible to avoid being affected by exam pressures and stress to some extent. And I kind of agree with that. I think this sense of powerlessness and being pressed by the weight of other people's expectations, it can be quite exhausting. However, there are some key coping strategies that have really helped me over the last few years survive the exam seasons, and hopefully many more to come, and I want to pass these on to you now. So CBT is something that's massively helped me, and it can help to really change the way that we think and feel about things. Now, I am not a qualified CBT practitioner. I've just had it for many years, but I wanted to pass on some of the I suppose, strategies and knowledge that I've accrued by having it. So it's all about, CBT is all essentially about our thoughts, feelings and behaviour, and the way that they are all linked. So for example, if we have negative thoughts, this can lead to feelings of stress and pressure, and then that in turn may make us behave in ways that are out of character. So, those negative, unrealistic thoughts about the worst case scenarios in the exams, and about students and parents and school leaders that are going to blame us, and, blaming individual teachers, actually end up meaning that the actual situation and what is the reality becomes skewed in our minds. So it's about trying to clear the fog and think rationally. And in my book, I advocate the use of journaling. And there are some resources that I've put in chapter 3 for that, which might help put things into perspective. There's a thought record that I found really, really useful and use lots myself, as it helps to rationalise and actually helps us see the wood for the trees. I mean, an example of that is that, there might be a student in my year 11 class who I think is really bright and really able, and I use the data to give them a centre assessed grade that I thought was fair. And, at this point, I'm worrying that the fact that she did quite badly on her mock because she had a panic attack is going to mean that she gets that low grade. And that then manifests itself in parental complaints and, all sorts. And you do become kind of almost trapped in this negative cycle of thought. And it's about just going and breathing and sitting and trying to rationalise. And I think the resources in chapter 3 will hopefully help people do that. I think something else that's really, really important is chatting to others. And I think that's where things like colleagues and Twitter become so important, because I think it's very difficult for those of us who are not teachers to actually understand the pressure that we put ourselves under for results. Other people have said to me, well, it's not you sitting the exams. If the kids fail, it's their fault. But, there is that teacher guilt up there that does think that we have had some hand in that. So I think chatting to others who've experienced it and understand is really important, and it can help you. And then I think the final thing for this category, to help you retain some positivity, some things that you need to remember this half term, is to focus on the success stories, on the positive. So, keep those cards and messages and nice emails that you get from kids. I have a folder actually in my inbox, my email inbox, and if I have a bad day, instead of sitting on Tess or looking on Indeed.com or whatever for other jobs outside of teaching, I go to this folder and I read some of the real impact that I've had on kids over the years. You do make a huge difference, and it's important to remember that. So this is a couple of the ones that I always look at from a few years ago. Both boys, both science and maths stands, reluctant English scholars, absolutely hated it. Both came out with 7s and 8s. And I always look back at these when I'm having a bad day and think, do you know what? Actually, I'm doing okay. So it's a good thing to do. So the last tip I've picked, really, the last category, is about juggling fire of attitude and behaviour. And the reason why I've chosen this is because when I've been chatting online to people who've read my book, behaviour was one of the things that they were feeling most negative about and considering leaving the profession because of. And I think, people always ask, is behaviour in schools getting worse? Well, according to a YouGov poll in 2018, the overwhelming majority of teachers believe that it actually is. So in this poll, 57% of teachers questioned said that they believed there'd been a huge deterioration since 2013, especially in primary schools, and they said that they noticed the biggest difference. And a lot of the teachers that were questioned, who felt the decline was more noticeable, had been teaching for more than 5 years, so they were those experienced teachers, and they cited issues such as bigger class sizes, budget cuts. But others actually felt that it was a lack of support from SLT and parents, or there was an inconsistent application of whole school behaviour policies, and that was one of the key factors. So at the moment, our students haven't been in school for months, so getting back into some kind of routine and the rules and regulations of school might not be that easy for some of them. Some will have had quite poor experiences since they've been off, where they've been dealing with hunger, family redundancies, and even death. Some of their relatives may have died, or people that they know, and that may manifest itself in more challenging behaviour. Some students will have done little work and might not have a huge amount of motivation or not been subject to much kind of routine and discipline while they've been off, because parents have been having to work every hour God sends to get some money. So, it might be quite difficult in September, and this is why I wanted to look at this category and some tips to do with this to try and help people stay positive and cope with it. So these are my 4 messages for this that I hope you can remember in September to try and preserve positivity. I think consistency is absolute key. Tom Bennett wrote on his independent report on behaviour for schools that if a behaviour policy is going to be successful, it needs to have attention to detail and thoroughness. And that's really important because staff need to be completely clear about sanctions they'll be giving and when to actually give them. If somebody isn't consistent, it lets everybody else in the school down. So I think it's really important to link together in this kind of blanket of consistency in schools. The amount of times that I've told students to tuck shirts in, etc., and they've responded with, well, such a body doesn't ask us to do it. And, it's avoiding those small situations that when they build up can become quite stressful when we're getting tired towards the end of term. So consistency is huge and it needs to be a team effort. I think you need to make your expectations quite clear when you get back and stick to them. It's about positive discipline. I always, every single year at the beginning of the school year, like to talk to my classes about what my expectations are. And if I'm clear about those from the outset, I very rarely have any problems. And if I do, I can remind them about the chat that we had at the start of the year. And I think reminding students of those expectations this year is more important than ever because we haven't seen the majority of them since March. So, make time to do that at the start of the year, and then you can keep referring to it as you go through and just giving them a little gentle shove and reminding them. I think it's important to talk as well. We are all teachers of our subject. However, we are all pastoral teachers as well. And I think it's really important to talk to your students and actually get to the root of the problem. What's causing the behaviour? So my book talks a lot about Draker's research and the reasons that students might misbehave, because I found that really, really interesting when dealing with challenging students in my last school. So this isn't about making excuses for kids. That's not what we're trying to do. It's about us understanding why they are behaving in the ways that they're behaving and helping them actually empower them to smash the barriers that are stopping them from conforming to the rules. So it's not an excuses policy. It's about talking to them, getting to the root cause of the behaviour and helping them build strategies to actually start conforming and following the rules. And then I think also as well, one of the things that students struggle with, I think, is also building confidence and resilience, and that can manifest itself in quite challenging and negative behaviours. And I think changing a learning behaviour is actually a dynamic process. It's not something that we can solve overnight. And there was a report in 2019 from the EEF about changing learning behaviours. And they used some evidence from this conceptual framework adapted from Powell and Todd. And they use it to demonstrate that actually changing a pupil's emotional behaviour, such as the self-esteem and self-worth, is a dynamic process, and there are many, many reciprocal influences in it. That could be like the pupil's relationship with themselves, with others, and also with the curriculum as well. So it's about making students feel challenged but confident, and giving them that high success rate that Tom Sherrington talks about. I think he says 80% success rate, something like that, to do challenging tasks, and then they'll be able to build the confidence and the resilience to behave well, to try and to strive to be more academic in your lesson. And I think that just gives us this kind of positive atmosphere for everybody, doesn't it? And this is the conceptual framework that I mentioned before from Powell and Todd that the EF use. And you've got the learning the behaviours in the middle, and there's all of these kind of reciprocal factors that all impact, and then you've got these external influences on the outside. So that might be the communities they come from and their cultures. I read a paper, I think it was by Ingham, talking about Belfast working class boys and how they didn't feel like they could do as well in school because in their community, in their culture, school was seen as something that was quite establishment and not to be trusted. So, engaging parents and community and the family has a massive impact on students' learning behaviour and their sense of self-worth and their relationship with others. And the curriculum is hugely important, isn't it, as well? So if a student feels challenged by a curriculum, they get knowledge from it, then surely their behaviour will improve. And I think the final thing I wanted to chat about today really is my final chapter in the book that's called "The Grass Isn't Always Greener." And I think, the picture says it all. To me, teaching is the best job in the world. And I sometimes think that leaving teaching is not the magical antidote that it appears to be. And there is so much about the profession that people actually do miss when they leave. And that's why thousands of teachers return to the profession every single year, according to the DFE. So sometimes the grass just isn't greener as much as we may like to think it is. My personal experiences in journalism give me a perspective on teaching that possibly people who've gone straight through school and gone into teaching as a first profession might not have. And when I was a journalist at the News of the World in London, I regularly worked 15, 16, even more hours a day. I had to be constantly on call 24 hours a day, waiting for my mobile phone to ring because news just doesn't sleep. I was rarely allowed holidays. I remember one particular year that I recall in the book, going away for Christmas and then being telephoned and screamed at by my editor at the time, asking me where I was and how dare I turn my phone off. So I think as teachers, really, we sometimes, catastrophize and give a negative slant to events, like I said at the start. And we actually are so privileged to do the job that we do. And I think it's sometimes important to give ourselves our heads a bit of a wobble, really, and remember that. And when I put the question on Twitter about a year ago now, about why people stayed in the profession and why they loved it, I got some absolutely amazing answers, and I print a lot of these in the book. These are just a small selection of them. I really like the one that's there. The job, for all its frustrations, feels meaningful. Witnessing children make progress socially, emotionally, academically is incredibly fulfilling. And it is. I can't think of a more fulfilling job. And I think when we're tired, it's easy to remember that. So I wanted to finish really by showing you this 7 reasons why teaching is the best job in the world. And I think they speak for themselves, really. As teachers, we have the potential to transform lives. And I love my job because I'm a very creative person, as you probably noticed, and it gives me the chance to be continuously creative and to improve and to get better. As teachers, we are incredibly self-reflective and we never stop learning and improving. I learn so much from the students that I teach and from new teachers as well that I mentor. And teaching is a very, very grounding, humbling profession when you think of some of the things that we deal with on a daily basis and some of the human experiences that we are witness to. It can't fail to touch you in that respect. And we can always find satisfaction from somewhere. That's really, really important to remember. I spoke to you before about keeping those cards, those emails, those well wishes from students. And we can always find something that we've done fantastically and made a difference with if we just look hard enough. And I think, as teachers, one of the most important things is that we actually have a chance to empower children to truly lead the world into the 21st century by the skills that we give them, the wisdom that we impart, the knowledge that we teach. It's all about the kids. And I really do believe that this is the best job in the world, and it's important at the beginning of this very dark, long term to remember that. So I hope that's been useful. I've really enjoyed chatting to you all today. So my book, Preserving Positivity, is out now. If you've liked some of the things that you've heard, there are some really practical tips in there, coupled with academic research and quite a lot of real life stories as well that I hope you get a lot from. So it's available from John Catt directly and also on Amazon and Waterstones. And thank you very much for your time today. And I really hope you have a largely positive term. Thank you.